get started now. Using Sigma as a gateway to detection engineering. Thanks for coming. Last talk of the day. We're almost there. My name is Micah Babinski. Really excited to talk with you all about Sigma, detection engineering, and all that good stuff. I love how Joe, in his opening keynote, talked a little bit about his personal background. I was not a skateboarder or a punk rocker early on, but just a little bit about me. I didn't start in security. I worked in the Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, industry for a good 12 years or so before coming into security. I used to go to a GIS conference in this very room every year, GIS in Action. And a little bit more kind of odd hobby you get into as a kid is I played the bagpipes. Well, I play the bagpipes from 1998 until present. That's a picture of me up there as a young bagpipe student, probably early 2000s or something. So anyways, but today, and what I'm here to talk about with you now is more geared towards my work where I'm a principal detection engineer at Amtrak. And other things that I love to talk with people about. Networking is, I'm always up for trying some new recipe or baking something. My kiddo became obsessed with gingerbread men, so we made some gingerbread men. Now just got those coming out, covering the countertops, basically. But yeah, so kind of my cybersecurity journey, I think it's worth sharing about. I think maybe I'm the kind of person who just needs to change careers every 10 or 15 years. So I think next I'm gonna go for a hiking guide. Hopefully, in my early 50s, I'm still up for that. But in terms of cybersecurity, I was working GIS, kind of not feeling too hot on it after a while, and the pandemic was rearing its head. And so I had been interested in security since I worked next door to the InfoSec team at City of Portland, where I used to work. And I came through a boot camp. I'm not gonna go into opinions on boot camps versus other ways of learning, but it worked for me. After a few months of struggle, I found my way into my foot in the door as a SOC analyst. And then from there, I went to more kind of generalized security analyst role, doing some auditing, some phishing tests. Love that last presentation, and security awareness training, good stuff like that. But I really liked monitoring the logs, and I really liked researching threats that were coming out. Log4j was happening as I was working there. And I really liked learning about these new threats and seeing, can I find these in my logs? Can I find something weird in my logs? And at that point, which was not very long ago, I did not even know what detection engineering was. But that's been my specialty for the last couple of years. I love it, and I was telling someone before, I feel like I've struck gold. I feel like detection engineer is the coolest, most fun job in this industry. Of course, I haven't had too many jobs in this industry, so, but in terms of my involvement with Sigma, which is I'm gonna be talking about with you today, I got my first Sigma rule contributed December 2022. So less than a year ago. So it's been very exciting to be a Sigma contributor. Real quick show of hands, who here has been a Sigma user in any way? Like read a rule, used a rule? Awesome. Okay, not too many people. Awesome. That's great. So before I roll in, detection engineering, what is it? This is my own mind map for detection engineering, and hopefully you can read that okay, but these are the key components that I think I cannot be a good detection engineer without this stuff up here. So knowledge of your threats, working with your red team and your pen testers to figure out what they're using, reading those threat intel reports, and then you need some engineering capability within your organization or your team to know about, okay, how do you use the detection and response platforms, the SIM products that you might use. Maybe you're trying to do some detection as code. I don't know if anybody caught the detection as code workshop earlier today from Ken Weston. I did that and it was fantastic. There's also how do you validate and optimize your alert rules so you're getting the most value, not creating extra work for your SOC analysts. You don't want your SOC to be angry at you. You want them to be working with you. And I love how this conference is focused on the community and organizational culture that builds across the security industry and also the customers that we serve. So knowledge sharing, how do you access open sources of detection logic and get feedback integrated, everyone from the CISO on down to the junior SOC analyst. As a detection engineer, you have to be open to that feedback and seeing all of those people as your customers. And then there's the organizational knowledge. That's key. So whatever company or organization you're at, what is the business technology environment? What apps and software are they using? You're going to need to know how that works on some level, so that you know how your detection capability can extend and cover those things. So that's my quick rundown. This is not an official definition. This is just like my own, like Micah's quick rundown of like what he thinks detection engineering is. And I'm still learning, as you can tell, because I'm still pretty new at this. But going back to early in my career as like security, which again, just a couple years ago, working as a SOC analyst, you learn some really cool tools if you're doing labs and stuff, volatility, Wireshark, malware analysis. For me, it was just a lot of logs. I'm guessing if any of you all work as a security analyst in like a junior role, yeah, there's just a lot of logs. And so, there's various levels of experience usually on these analyst teams. Some people might really know what, Sysmon Event ID 3 does and tells you. Some people might know what Windows Security Event 4663 can tell you and what it can't. Some people that's going to be like speaking, a language they don't understand. And so as a new professional, it's important to try to understand what those attacks look like in terms of logs, which, as John Strand said in one of those pay what you can trainings that he offers, unfortunately, despite what your EDR vendor might tell you, there is no single log that's like, you have been hacked. It's on us as professionals, students, and learners to figure out what are our logs telling us. And as I'm going to get to, Sigma can be a powerful tool in your toolbox for doing that. How about the rules? If you're working alerts, you're working an alert queue, hopefully the rule has a meaningful title. Hopefully there's a description that can tell you what it's looking for. Hopefully it will give you the log message or the event that triggered that alert rule. And hopefully you have the contextual knowledge to understand, what else might I want to look for if I'm seeing this particular type of alert. I'm going to be honest, though, I don't think every organization has that capability of alert rules that are meaningful, impactful, and give an analyst a starting point for effective follow-on investigation. So this is just kind of some of the challenges that I ran into. Story time. So we had a rule at my first job and working in the SOC called executables in ADS. Now, maybe some of you know what ADS stands for. Maybe some of you don't. My team, we just thought it was talking about like ads, like advertisements, download something, you get a drive-by download, and all of a sudden you've got a malicious executable. And we worked this alert for months thinking that. And then we're doing a review, and all of a sudden the guy who did our alerting, our detection rules, he didn't have the title of detection engineer. I don't even really think the company necessarily knew about detection engineering as a discipline. Again, this was a couple years ago. This is pretty new stuff. It was like, oh, he started talking about it, and we're like, what? Alternate data stream? Like, what? Oh, okay. Sheepishly, we had to all admit that we thought this rule was talking about something completely different. And so understanding the context behind the alerts that you're working is important as a security analyst, but as a detection engineer, it's your responsibility. If your analysts don't understand the alerts that you're working, you're not doing your job right. Gosh, I sound so harsh. Oh. I'm not angry, I swear. It's a privilege to be a detection engineer. It's a privilege to work with analysts at all different levels of their career. And so, talking about Sigma now. Sigma is an open source project that I've really come to love. This is the sort of like the standard answer, the ChatGPT answer that you get. And it'll say it's a generic and open source log-based detection format. It's a YAML file, so basically a semi-structured, kind of like JSON, if you ever worked with JSON files. And it's a way of saying, in a vendor-agnostic way, what are the conditions and all the properties that would lead into a detection rule. So this is the definition. It's somewhat helpful, but it really focuses on this signature format, a standardized generic format that you can write as a detection rule. My definition goes beyond this, though. I think it's more than just one thing. For me, it's really 3 or even 4 things. There's the detection rule format that I just talked about, but there's also an actual peer-reviewed, community-supported repository, or like a library of detection rules that are maintained by some of the best detection engineers in the world. and that is maintained by a community of people everywhere from students all the way up to senior people that can contribute Sigma rules. And so if you're a student or if you're early in your career, you're interested in a career specialized in detection, that's a place you're going to want to check out, both to learn and maybe, hopefully, to contribute. It's also a series of conversion tools. So like if you have an awesome Sigma rule, that's great. But if you can't use it effectively in your SIM or your detection and response monitoring platform of choice, it's not going to be that helpful. And so there's these series of conversion tools called backends or plugins, depending on the context you're talking about them with. And that's a key part of the project. And then fourth, we're talking about community at BSides this year. So it's a community of researchers, engineers, and all types of people who contribute to the project and make it flourish and make it, I believe, one of the most valuable open source, at least on the defensive side, at least when you're talking about logs, which again, as analysts and people, a lot of our detection happens via logs. This community is driving that and making that project successful. Okay, so I'm going to go in depth a little bit more on each of those Sigma components that I just listed. So this is the format that I talked about. This is an infographic. I don't know if that's hecka grainy. Okay, sorry. Well, I will make these slides available on my LinkedIn. Encourage you all to connect with me after this. I'll throw it up on X as well. But this is going to have, this is an infographic by this guy, Thomas Rochia, who wrote a book called Visual Threat Intelligence. I highly recommend you check it out. His handle is Frogger, but he basically breaks down all the components of a Sigma rule. There's a lot in here. I'm just going to break it into 3 key components. So there's the metadata. That's your title, description, identifier, the author, the data about the data with regards to this rule. Then there's the log source definition. Is this a Linux file event rule? Is it a Mac OS process creation rule? Is it a cloud, Azure sign-in logs based rule? Basically defining, go from this generic format and tell your SIM product or your output query, what kind of logs are we looking at here? And there's a standardized taxonomy that you can read about and learn, and then figure out how to correctly record that. It's a little confusing. It's one of the hardest things to learn about using Sigma rules, but it is important because it defines what is your input data. And then there's the detection itself. Well, that's probably the most important part, actually. But basically, you're looking at field names, conditions, values, and modifiers. And so that's just basically saying process name equals run DLL 32, or command line contains ARP-A or something. And so that's where you're basically saying, what's the logic behind this rule? And it's a very simple format to learn. And there's a lot of flexibility in it too. When I talk about some of the newer versions of the Pi Sigma project, the newer code base, we'll get into a little bit more of what you can do with this, but it's really cool and not hard to understand. The rules repo. This is a place where you're going to want to spend some time. I don't know if you read that a little bit, but yeah, there's thousands of Sigma rules. They're categorized effectively in this GitHub repository. If you just search for GitHub Sigma rules, it'll pop right up. They're categorized by operating system, different cloud platforms, whether it's network, there's DNS rules. That covers a lot of it that I just mentioned there, but it's nicely categorized. There's rules that are more geared towards threat hunting too. So not something you'd want to turn on in your environment, but something that could be the starting point for a threat hunt. Pretty useful. If you want to submit a rule, if you've done some research, actually, the last presentation talking about, configuring webhooks maliciously within Microsoft Teams, I guarantee you there's going to be some Microsoft 365 audit logs that are going to be left with certain properties that might be suspicious when you do that kind of activity. I checked. There's no rule in this Sigma rules repo. Anyone here who saw the last presentation or watched it on YouTube could recreate what the speaker did and could attempt or probably have good success creating a brand new novel Sigma rule that could then be used by the entire community. So enough about that, but you submit it, there's a team who will review your pull request. They'll scrutinize it and they'll make sure that it's a high quality rules library that can be used by a lot of different people. The conversion tool. So this is just a simple graphic that shows how it works. You've got that generic Sigma format. You put that through the sausage grinder of your Sigma converter, aka a Sigma backend or plugin, and then your output is you can choose maybe Elasticsearch, Splunk, Panther. If you went to the Detection as Code workshop, it was using Panther. There's a Sigma backend in the works for Panther right now. So there's all these different output formats that you can specify, and the command on the screen there, it's hard to read, but it basically shows you run this Sigma convert command, and then you can output whatever target or output format you want, and then you're going to get a query in that Splunk processing language, Kibana query language, what have you, whatever that output format that you choose is. It's a really cool way to get a new rule. So for the small number of people who have used Sigma, you saw used to be a website called uncoder.io that you could just get to, where it was a web page where you could paste a Sigma rule in, and then you could hit convert, choose your output format. That's using the old legacy Sigma code base. There's a new version called PySigma, which I've been involved with. It's got a smaller number of those output conversion formats, smaller number of backends, but it's growing. The old code base is you can still get to those legacy tools, but it's not really being maintained. If you're interested in contributing a new backend, you're going to want to check out this PySigma. And there's a lot of additional modifiers. Like, let's say you want to focus your rule using IP addresses. We can specify a CIDR range in the rule as one of those modifiers on your rule conditions, which is pretty cool if you're trying to maybe focus your detection towards public or private IP addresses. There's a lot of things like one modifier called win-dash. So I mentioned arp-a. It's a common discovery command used by like a lot of commodity malware. Well, if you run arp/a or you run arp-a, like -a, you get the same output. And so the win-dash modifier, as you're writing your Sigma rule, will basically account for those variations, and it will add those conditions to the output rule. So you don't have to focus on, oh, did I forget to put like arp-a, or it'll just handle that for you. So all this is just to say that the new PySigma code base, if you're interested in getting involved with Sigma, start there. And that's, if you go to their website, their blog, that's where that's gonna be your entry point. So how I got involved with all this, I was working at a job actually really near to here, just a couple blocks away from where we're sitting, that we use Rapid7 Insight IDR, which is a really cool cloud-based SIM. I was interested in converting some Sigma rules into Rapid7 Insight IDR. It's called log entry query language. So I was like, oh, well, is there a backend for that? No, there was not. So it turns out from my GIS years, I had some pretty decent Python knowledge, and I set the goal of saying, I'm going to create my own PySigma backend for Rapid7 Insight IDR. It was about 3-4 months of like some late nights, some weekend work. After my kiddo goes to bed, I'm working on that thing for about 3 months. But then after a while, I got it working, and all of a sudden it was accepted and part of the Sigma HQ community. That was a really cool experience. And then I checked out, if you're interested in threat detection, the Red Canary annual threat detection report. They publish it every year, and they've got like monthly threat detection summaries. And they've got all these different attacker techniques, all these different types of malware, and these pseudocode detections that give you these concepts. Well, I decided to go through that entire 2022 detection report and write Sigma rules for every single pseudocode detection that I could. So all of a sudden, I'm writing rules. I've got my own GitHub Sigma rules repository. I'm starting to see blog posts. So then I start my own blog posts where I'm learning about new threats. Like this fellow, Guilherme, was talking about the evolution and the way that commodity malware is delivered in his metadata, follow the metadata presentation earlier today. Well, I was right there with him as you were seeing like TACBot change from zip files to PDFs to OneNote files. Now they're using WebDAV servers to deliver malware, and I'm all of a sudden I'm standing up my own home detection lab with Splunk, and I'm running malware samples or checking out threat intel blogs and writing Sigma rules and then blogging about it and having just a ton of fun. And so that got me involved and so now I've got about 10 Sigma rules in that main Sigma rules repo that I mentioned. And it's just a great community. It's just been really, really enjoyable to me. And in terms of my home lab, because people always ask me about this, there's this project from this guy, I think his name is Chris Long, that he has this project called detectionlab.network that gives you basically a little vagrant file to set up a little Windows Active Directory domain, a little couple target hosts, and then, but I'm in search of a better solution. So if anybody has a better way to do that, because it's not maintained anymore, I spend a lot of time troubleshooting. I'm interested in your suggestions. So here's a little bit about the community. These are some of the key players you'll probably come across if you get involved with Sigma. The guy on the left here, Florian Roth, he's kind of like the thought leader or almost like the godfather of Sigma. He's one of the founders. I believe he lives in Frankfurt, Germany, and he's got strong opinions. I know he rubs some people the wrong way. He's been very, very supportive of me getting into this. And, you know, I'm pretty new at this, and I was not afraid to show my ignorance of things. But he's like, what I've found is with all of these, everyone involved with Sigma, if you're trying something new, you're exploring something new and trying to bring something new to the table, they're going to be a very welcoming community. Nasruddin is the guy who is probably going to be reviewing your pull requests. If you submit a new rule to the Sigma rules repo, chances are he's going to be the one reviewing it. And he asks the tough questions. He pushes back. If there's a better way to do it, he will say, why didn't you do it this way? And being new to this kind of stuff, it could be a little intimidating. But what I realized was this guy he cares about the project, and he cares about making me a better analyst and a better detection engineer. And so through working with him, my skill and my knowledge of different log sources and different detection capabilities has really improved. Frac 113, I kind of think of him as like the secretary of the Sigma project. He's going through and making sure all these thousands of Sigma rules are consistently formatted, are properly tagged, and are like maintained to a very high degree of quality. And then you got my friend Thomas Patsky over there, who was hugely helpful when I was coding my own Pi Sigma backend for Rapid7 Insight IDR. This guy is a consummate engineer, very, very smart, but he helped me so much. And we were eventually able to exchange some ideas, like the way that I was using, evaluating different conditions within my backend. He was able to take some of those and put them into the base Pi Sigma code base. And it's just a pleasure to work with, a really, really nice guy. So these are some of the community members that you will probably come across if you get involved with Sigma. So that basically brings me to the end of my talk. And here's a bunch of links and stuff that I've found really helpful. I'm open to any questions, and I really hope you've enjoyed the conference, and thanks to BSides and everybody for making this such a great event.
Are you allowed to speak about the type and nature of threat actor that may be targeting someone like Amtrak?
I mean, without going into anything like confidential or proprietary, like I think it's awesome. I love working there because it's critical infrastructure. It's kind of a quasi-government organization. So there's, the roster of like nation states that you would suspect, in addition to the financially motivated ones. But I'm not really a cyber threat intel specialist, but I do definitely keep an eye on such things. And so I hope that answers your question. But definitely like the commodity malware and things like SEO poisoning. It's a big company. It's a big company with a lot of people at work, and so there's a lot of targets and a lot of people out there trying to target that organization. But so it's kind of what you would expect. What you could gather from the context of what I'm saying.
My question, since you're working for Amtrak, I've worked in the ICS OT space, and I find some of the most difficult parts is not in the technology, but in the cultures that can be hard to change, hard to push, hard to get any sort of leverage. So where has your success been in implementing that in your environment?
I think part of what an approach like I've taken in my relatively short career in threat detection has benefited or gained from is an openness to sharing information. Actually, Florian, the guy that I showed a picture of in the last slide, he's written extensively about how hard it is when you have threat intelligence reports that are published and well-researched, but then they lack the meat that us detection engineers really need, the example log entries. There's blog posts. I really like Trellix, has blogs about CACBot and things where they include Sigma rules. Huntress, if you're familiar with Huntress, they're starting to share Sigma rules with the community. So I look at the benefits that I've gotten from like that cross-community collaboration just in my own like career development and community development within detection as a good metaphor for how a company like mine can benefit from like breaking down those silos, to use that kind of executive speak, but working across those lines of IT and OT. It's definitely an area where there's a lot of improvement to be had, but it's something we're working on for sure.
I'm going to ask the nerd question for you that you'll enjoy. So what's the detection that you've found to be the best or maybe the squirreliest one you've had to deal with for the problem presented to you? And that what did you have to do to increase the efficacy of that particular detectionary thing when dealing with that situation? Because sometimes these rules just are really out there in the wild. So
yeah, that is a good question. Well, if you if you visit my blog, so I had this one concept. There's a friend of mine who he goes by Blue Team Thomas, but he basically posted on then Twitter his sort of like detection engineer workout, and it was like fire up your detection lab, find an atomic red team test. Run that test, see what Sigma rules are out there, see how you would detect that, and then tweak the test. So in this case, I was looking at detections using the internal file name, or like what you might see in Sysmon original file name, because you can rename an EXE easily. I've seen threat actors do that with PowerShell all the time, but that original file name attribute is harder to tweak, except there's a tool out there that will do exactly that. So there's, I think it's trying to use these tools that are out there, open source tools, to evade the common ways that you would detect the original evasion. And so it is this game of cat and mouse. That's just an example. That there's a tool. It's one of those 10 rules that I've got contributed to Sigma. But it's basically a way of getting around detections for renaming, masquerading things. And so that's just a small example of how a rule, can be circumvented, and that how people like you all, are needed to then pick apart those detections and try to improve the rule sets that are out there for the community. Okay, well, there's no other questions. Thank you so much.